The morning sun painted golden streaks across the kitchen countertop as Daniel Anderson packed the last of the beach toys into a worn canvas bag. His wife Kimberly's laughter drifted in from the garage, where she was trying to convince their teenage daughter Zara that yes, she really did need to bring sunscreen to Florida. Their son Aiden, already wearing his favorite swimming shorts, bounced around the house looking for his tablet. "Dad, have you seen my charger?" Aiden called out, his voice echoing through their suburban home. Daniel smiled, pulling the charger from his meticulously packed electronics bag. After 15 years in the FBI's Civil Rights Division, organization had become second nature to him. "Got it right here, buddy," he replied, watching his son's face light up. It had been 3 years since they'd taken a proper family vacation. Between Kimberly's packed schedule at the children's hospital and his own demanding caseload, finding time for a full week away had felt impossible. But here they were, finally ready for their dream beach getaway. The garage door hummed as Kimberly backed out their dark blue SUV, its roof rack loaded with their luggage. She had spent weeks researching the perfect beachfront rental in Palm Harbor, a picturesque town along Florida's Gulf Coast. The photos showed pristine white sand beaches, a private pool, and a modern kitchen where she planned to cook their favorite family meals. Everyone got their road trip snacks. Kimberly asked, her warm brown eyes scanning the backseat where Zara was already lost in her headphones. At 15, she'd initially protested the idea of a family vacation, but even she couldn't resist the promise of beach selfies and shopping at the nearby outlets. "I packed trail mix," Aiden announced proudly, holding up a container filled with a peculiar mixture of chocolate chips, dried mangoes, and what appeared to be goldfish crackers. Daniel and Kimberly exchanged amused glances. Their 12-year-old's culinary experiments were always interesting. As they pulled out of their driveway, Daniel felt the weight of work slowly lifting from his shoulders. He'd handed off his active cases to his colleague and trusted friend at the bureau, making sure to tie up any loose ends. This week was about family, about making up for missed dinners and weekend commitments. The drive south was filled with the kind of casual banter that makes family road trips memorable. Zara shared gossip about her school's drama club, while Aiden challenged everyone to increasingly ridiculous rounds of I Spy. Kimberly had created the perfect playlist, mixing current hits with classic road trip songs that had them all singing along, even Zara, who pretended not to know the words to her dad's favorite 90s tunes. They stopped at a small diner for lunch, where Aiden insisted on ordering breakfast for lunch because vacation rules are different, right? The waitress, an older woman with kind eyes, brought them extra bacon just because. It was these little moments that made Daniel realize how much they needed this time together. As they crossed the Florida state line, the air seemed to change. The humidity wrapped around them like a warm blanket, and palm trees started dotting the landscape. Aiden pressed his face against the window, counting license plates from different states. Zara even put down her phone long enough to admire the coastline as they drove along the Gulf. "Look at that water," Kimberly exclaimed as they approached Palm Harbor. The late afternoon sun turned the Gulf of Mexico into a sheet of diamonds, sparkling invitingly. Their rental house was located in an upscale neighborhood called Harbor Cove, where elegant homes lined quiet streets. The GPS guided them down a tree-lined avenue, each house more impressive than the last. Their rental, a modern 3-story home with large windows and a wraparound porch, stood proudly at the corner. Daniel pulled into the driveway, and for a moment, they all sat in appreciative silence. "This is way better than the pictures," Zara admitted, already planning which bedroom would be hers. The house's pale blue exterior and white trim perfectly matched the coastal setting, and they could hear the soft sound of waves from where they parked. As they began unloading their luggage, the excitement was tangible. Aiden ran up and down the driveway, unable to contain his energy. Kimberly started organizing their cooler supplies, while Zara documented their arrival for her social media followers. Daniel stood for a moment, taking in the scene of his family's joy, completely unaware that their perfect vacation was about to take an unexpected turn. The warm Florida breeze carried the salt air as the Anderson family began unloading their SUV. Aiden was already plotting his first swim, while Zara helped her mom unpack the cooler filled with drinks and snacks for their first evening. Daniel reached for another suitcase from the roof rack, pausing to wave at a couple walking their dog across the street. "Mom, can I take my stuff up to my room?" Aiden asked, practically bouncing with excitement as he clutched his backpack. Kimberly was about to answer when the peaceful afternoon shattered. The sound of squealing tires cut through the air. 2 police cruisers suddenly appeared, blocking both ends of the street. The screech of brakes made Zara drop her phone, and Kimberly instinctively reached for Aiden, pulling him close. "Hands where we can see them," a sharp voice commanded through a megaphone. 4 officers emerged from their vehicles, weapons drawn. The family froze, their perfect vacation dissolving into a nightmare. "Officers, there seems to be a misunderstanding," Daniel said calmly, slowly raising his hands. His FBI training kicked in, but right now, he wasn't Agent Anderson. He was just a father trying to protect his family. "Shut up and get on the ground," one officer shouted, his face red with unnecessary anger. He was young, maybe in his late 20s, with a tight grip on his weapon that betrayed his nervousness. Kimberly's medical training helped her maintain composure, though her heart raced. "We're just checking into our vacation rental," she explained steadily, one arm still around Aiden, who had started trembling. "We have a report of suspicious individuals breaking and entering," an older officer announced, his sunglasses hiding his eyes as he approached them. "Someone saw you trying to access the property." Zara, her voice shaking but clear, spoke up. "We have the rental agreement. It's in my mom's purse. We can show you." "Don't move." Another officer barked, causing Zara to flinch. Tears welled in her eyes, but she stood tall, just like her parents had taught her. More police cars arrived, their lights flashing silently in the late afternoon sun. Neighbors began emerging from their homes, some with phones raised, recording the scene. An elderly woman across the street covered her mouth in shock, while a man a few houses down started walking toward them with purpose. "I have all our documentation right here," Daniel said, his voice steady and professional. "The rental agreement, our IDs, everything you need to verify our reservation." The first officer stepped closer, his weapon still raised. "Sure you do. And I suppose you just happened to pick this neighborhood for your vacation." The way he said vacation made Kimberly's stomach turn. She'd heard that term before, in subtle ways throughout her career, but never so blatantly directed at her family. "Sir," a new voice called out. It was the man from down the street, now standing at the edge of his driveway. "I'm on that HOA board. I can confirm there's supposed to be a family checking in today. I have the rental calendar right here on my phone." The officers ignored him, instead ordering the family to separate. Aiden clung to his mother, tears now streaming down his face. "Mom, I'm scared," he whispered. "It's okay, baby," Kimberly soothed, though her own voice wavered. "Everything's going to be okay. We haven't done anything wrong." Another police car pulled up, and a female officer stepped out. She approached her colleagues, speaking in hushed tones. Daniel noticed her glancing at the growing crowd of neighbors, some of whom were now openly protesting the officer's actions. "The rental agency," Daniel began again, his hands still raised. "You can call them Pleasant Coast Rentals. Our check-in time was 4 p.m. It's all properly documented." The original officer's radio crackled with a dispatcher's voice, but he kept his attention focused on the family. More neighbors had gathered, and the murmur of their voices grew louder. Someone mentioned calling the local news. "Look at their car," one neighbor called out. "Look at their luggage. They're obviously on vacation. This is ridiculous." The summer heat beat down on them as they stood in this terrible tableau. A family's joy turned to fear, surrounded by drawn weapons and flashing lights, all because someone had decided they didn't look like they belonged. Zora's phone lay face up on the driveway, still recording her vacation video. In the frame, you could see her father's steady hands raised against the blue sky, her mother's protective stance around her little brother, and the harsh shadows of police officers advancing on what should have been the beginning of their perfect family getaway. The rough surface of the hot pavement pressed against Daniel's cheek as he lay face down in his family's vacation rental driveway. The scene had escalated quickly, with more patrol cars arriving and the number of officers growing to 8. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, turning the peaceful street into an outdoor pressure cooker. "Please," Kimberly's voice cracked as she watched an officer roughly handcuff her husband. "Our children are watching. You don't need to do this." She remained standing, one arm still protectively around Aiden, who had buried his face in her side. "Ma'am, get down on the ground now." The commanding officer's voice held no room for discussion. Kimberly looked at her children, her doctor's composure warring with her maternal instinct to protect them from this trauma. "Mom?" Zora's voice trembled. The teenager who had been so excited about beach selfies now stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. "What do we do?" "It's okay, sweetheart," Kimberly said softly. "Do what they say. Dad and I are right here." She slowly knelt down, helping Aiden to do the same. The 12-year-old boy was shaking uncontrollably now, his vacation swimming shorts scraping against the rough pavement. The neighbors' crowd had grown larger. Mrs. Chen from 3 doors down was still on the phone with the rental agency, her voice rising in frustration. "Yes, I need immediate confirmation of the Anderson family's reservation. This is an emergency." "I've got my camera running," called out another neighbor. "This is all being recorded. Badge numbers, faces, everything." The female officer who had arrived earlier stepped forward, her expression showing hints of discomfort. "Sir," she addressed her superior, "I've got preliminary confirmation from dispatch about a rental agreement." "Standard procedure," the lead officer cut her off. "We secure the scene first, sort out details later." He turned to another officer. "Check the perimeter of the house. Make sure no one's tried to break in." Daniel could feel the sun burning the back of his neck as he lay there. His FBI training had taught him to stay calm in crisis situations, but this was different. This wasn't an operation or an investigation. This was his family being humiliated in front of strangers, their dignity stripped away with each passing moment. Zora's sobs had quieted to hiccups as an officer secured her hands behind her back with plastic zip ties. "Your bracelet's too tight," she managed to say, but her voice was lost in the chaos of radio chatter and concerned neighbors' voices. Aiden had started humming quietly, the same thing he did during thunderstorms when he was scared. The sound broke Kimberly's heart. Their youngest, who had been bouncing with excitement just minutes ago, was trying to escape into his own world to cope with the terror. "The rental agency is on the line," Mrs. Chen shouted, walking closer despite an officer's warning to stay back. "They can confirm everything. Just talk to them." A new police SUV pulled up and a detective stepped out. He surveyed the scene with a frown, taking in the handcuffed family on the ground, the growing crowd of angry neighbors, and the multitude of recording phones pointed in their direction. "My son needs his inhaler," Kimberly said firmly, her doctor's authority seeping into her voice. "It's in my purse, and he's due for a dose." She had noticed Aiden's breathing becoming more rapid, a sure sign of an oncoming anxiety attack. The female officer moved toward Kimberly's purse, but was stopped by her superior. "That bag needs to be searched properly first. Could be anything in there." "Anything in there?" A neighbor's voice rang out incredulously. "They've got beach toys and coolers. They're obviously a family on vacation." Daniel felt something shift in his pocket as he lay there. His FBI credentials were working their way out of his jacket. He remained still, letting events play out, gathering every detail, every badge number, every name he could hear. Years of investigating civil rights violations had taught him the importance of documentation. The detective who had just arrived was speaking quietly into his radio, his eyes moving between the family and his agitated colleagues. The sun continued its relentless beating, and the asphalt grew hotter beneath them. Somewhere down the street, an ice cream truck's cheerful music provided a surreal soundtrack to their ordeal. "Dad." Aiden's whisper carried across the driveway. "I can't. It's hard to breathe." Those words snapped something in Daniel. He could handle being handcuffed. He could handle the humiliation, but his son not being able to breathe, that was a line he wouldn't allow to be crossed. Just then, his credentials slipped completely from his pocket, landing on the pavement with an official FBI badge clearly visible in the harsh Florida sun. The gleam of the FBI credentials against the hot pavement caught the female officer's eye first. She had been moving toward Aiden, finally deciding to retrieve his inhaler despite her superior's orders. The badge's golden shield sparkled under the Florida sun, impossible to miss against the dark asphalt. "Sir," she called out, her voice carrying a note of alarm. "You need to see this." She took a step toward the badge, but Daniel's calm voice stopped her. "Please help my son first," he said firmly. "The inhaler is in my wife's blue purse, side pocket. Everything else can wait. The commanding officer stormed over, his boots heavy on the pavement. When he saw the badge, his face went through a series of rapid changes: disbelief, shock, and then something close to fear. The crowd of neighbors had grown silent, phones still recording, watching the scene unfold. "Get those cuffs off him," the detective who had recently arrived ordered sharply. "Now." But Daniel didn't move. "My son first," he repeated, his voice carrying the weight of 15 years of federal authority. "Then my wife and daughter. Then we can discuss my credentials." Aiden's breathing had become more labored, and Kimberly was doing her best to coach him through it while still restrained. "In through your nose, out through your mouth, baby, just like we practiced." The female officer had already retrieved the inhaler. She helped Aiden sit up, her movements gentle now, almost apologetic. The boy's hands shook as he took his medication, his mother whispering soft encouragement. "Sir, I apologize," the commanding officer started, moving to help Daniel up, but Daniel's voice cut through the air like steel. "Don't touch me," he said quietly. "Remove the restraints from my family first. All of them. Then we can begin sorting out this situation properly." The change in the officer's demeanor was dramatic. Suddenly, there were multiple hands helping Kimberly and Zara, removing zip ties and handcuffs with fumbling fingers. The neighbors watched in stunned silence as the power dynamic shifted before their eyes. "My credentials," Daniel said once his family was free, still lying on the ground, "contain my ID number. Feel free to call it in to verify." "I'm sure the Bureau would be very interested in hearing about this incident." The detective was already on his phone, walking in tight circles as he spoke in hushed tones. More senior officers were arriving now, their vehicles pulling up without sirens. The original officers who had drawn their weapons stood awkwardly, some unable to meet the eyes of the family they had just terrorized. Finally, Daniel slowly stood up, brushing off his clothes with deliberate movements. He walked over to his family, checking each of them carefully. Zara's wrists showed red marks from the zip ties. Aiden's breathing had steadied, but he was still trembling. Kimberly stood tall, her doctor's composure back in place, though her eyes blazed with controlled anger. Agent Anderson, the police captain, had arrived, practically running from his car. "I cannot express how deeply." "Captain," Daniel interrupted calmly, "I suggest you save your words for the formal investigation that will follow." He turned to the gathering of neighbors. "Would anyone who recorded this incident please make sure to save their footage? My office will be in touch to collect copies." Mrs. Chen stepped forward immediately. "I have everything from the moment they first pulled up. And I'm still on with the rental agency. They've been trying to tell these officers about your reservation for the past 20 minutes." The original commanding officer had retreated to his patrol car, his earlier bravado completely deflated. The female officer who had helped Aiden stood nearby, looking torn between duty and disgust at what had transpired. "Dad?" Zara's voice was small but steady. "What happens now?" Daniel turned to his daughter, his expression softening. "Now, sweetheart, we're going to go inside our rental house. We're going to unpack our vacation things. And tomorrow, we're going to enjoy our beach day as planned." He looked pointedly at the assembled officers, while other people deal with the consequences of their actions. The neighbors erupted in applause, but Daniel raised his hand for quiet. "Please," he addressed them, "we appreciate your support and witness to these events. But right now, my family needs some peace." As if on cue, Kimberly opened the rental house door with the keys she'd finally been allowed to retrieve from her purse. Aiden and Zara walked in first, followed by their mother. Daniel stood on the porch for a moment, surveying the scene one last time: the departing patrol cars, the dispersing neighbors, the beautiful beach view that had been temporarily tainted by ugly prejudice. "Captain," he said finally, "expect my call in the morning. For now, I have a vacation to salvage with my family." With that, he closed the door behind him, leaving a street full of chastened officers and impressed neighbors in his wake. Inside, he could hear Aiden asking if they could still go swimming tomorrow. Despite everything, Daniel smiled. They had come here for a family vacation, and that's exactly what they were going to have. Right after he made a few important phone calls to his office. Inside the beach rental, the Anderson family sat in the spacious living room, the sound of waves audible through the windows that had seemed so inviting just hours ago. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in gorgeous oranges and pinks that none of them were quite ready to appreciate. Aiden had finally stopped shaking, curled up against his mother on the plush sofa. Zara sat cross-legged on the floor, absently rubbing her wrists where the zip ties had left marks. "I need to make some calls," Daniel said softly, pulling out his phone. "But first, let's talk about what happened. How is everyone doing?" Kimberly ran her fingers through Aiden's hair, a gesture that had always calmed him. "Your breathing's better now, right, sweetie?" she asked. The boy nodded, though he still clung to her side. "I got everything on video," Zara said quietly. "From when I was recording our arrival until—" Her voice trailed off. "My friends are already texting me." Someone posted clips online. Outside, they could hear voices. The police captain was still there, along with several other officers. Neighbors kept walking by, some leaving notes of support in their mailbox. Mrs. Chen had brought over a plate of freshly baked cookies, insisting that comfort food was necessary at times like these. Daniel sat down on the coffee table, facing his family. "I'm so proud of how you all handled yourselves today," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But I'd also know how scary and wrong this was. It's okay to not be okay right now." Kimberly met her husband's eyes, years of shared understanding passing between them. "Should we go home?" she asked, though they both knew the answer would impact more than just their vacation. "No," Daniel replied firmly. "We're going to stay. We're going to enjoy our beach vacation. We won't let this define our time here." He turned to his children. "But we're also going to make sure this incident brings about real change." A knock at the door made Aiden jump. Daniel walked over, checking through the peephole to see the female officer who had helped with the inhaler. She stood alone, her hat in her hands. Opening the door partway, Daniel addressed her professionally. "Yes, officer?" "Sir, she hesitated, then straightened her shoulders. "I wanted to apologize, especially to your son. What happened today was wrong. I've already filed my preliminary report documenting everything I witnessed, including the delayed medical assistance." Daniel nodded, appreciating her initiative but maintaining professional distance. "Thank you, officer. Your report will be helpful in the investigation." After she left, Daniel made several phone calls, first to his supervisor at the FBI, then to colleagues in the Civil Rights Division. Each conversation was detailed, precise, and focused on facts. He took notes in his small black notebook, the same one he used to document countless other cases of injustice. Only this time, the victims were his own family. "Mom?" Zara asked as Daniel finished his calls. "Can we still go to the beach tomorrow?" Kimberly smiled, her first genuine smile since the incident. "Of course we can, baby. First thing in the morning." "I think," Daniel added, putting down his phone, "we should order pizza tonight. Lots of pizza, with extra everything." This brought a small giggle from Aiden, who finally lifted his head from his mother's shoulder. "Can we eat it on the balcony?" "I want to see the ocean." The family moved to the second-floor balcony, where the sea breeze carried away some of the day's tension. They could see their neighbors still gathering in small groups, discussing the incident. Someone had already hung a "Welcome Anderson Family" banner between two palm trees. As they waited for the pizza to arrive, Daniel received texts and emails from colleagues across the country. The incident was gaining attention. Local news vans had started appearing on their street, but the neighborhood association had already stepped in, keeping them at a respectful distance. "Dad," Aiden asked, watching the waves roll in, "are those police officers going to get in trouble?" Daniel considered his answer carefully. What happened today was wrong, and yes, there will be consequences. But more importantly, we're going to make sure this helps create change, so other families don't have to go through what we did. Zara, who had been quiet for a while, suddenly spoke up. "I want to help. With the case, I mean. My video, my statement, whatever you need. Those officers need to learn they can't just treat people this way." Kimberly reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. "We're all in this together. But tonight, we're going to eat pizza, watch the sunset, and remember that we're still on vacation." As if on cue, the doorbell rang. Mrs. Chen again, this time personally escorting the pizza delivery person to ensure they reached the house without any issues. The gesture brought tears to Kimberly's eyes. The evening ended with the family on the balcony, pizza boxes empty, stars beginning to appear over the ocean. They talked about their plans for tomorrow, which beach to visit, where to get the best ice cream, what seashells to look for. It wasn't the first vacation day they had imagined, but they were together, they were safe, and they were determined not to let fear win. Before bed, Daniel made one final call to his office, setting up meetings for the following week. But as he ended the call, he looked at his family. Aiden excitedly pointing out constellations, Zara taking photos of the moonlight on the water, Kimberly finally relaxing in a beach chair, and knew that for now, his most important job was being there for them. 3 months after their eventful Florida vacation, the Anderson family gathered in their living room, watching the local news coverage of the police department's announced reforms. Daniel sat on the couch, his laptop open to a draft of his latest training module on bias recognition. Kimberly leaned against his shoulder, while Aiden sprawled on the carpet, working on his social studies homework. "Dad, they're showing your speech," Zara called out as she hurried in from the kitchen, a bowl of popcorn in her hands. On screen, Daniel stood at a podium, addressing a packed room of law enforcement officials and community leaders. "Change doesn't happen overnight," his recorded voice stated firmly. "But it happens through accountability, education, and a willingness to acknowledge our mistakes and learn from them." The investigation that followed their vacation incident had revealed a pattern of similar complaints against the department. What made their case different wasn't just Daniel's FBI credentials, it was the overwhelming community response and the undeniable video evidence that Zara and the neighbors had captured. "Look, there's Mrs. Chen." Aiden pointed at the screen, where their vacation neighbor was being interviewed. She had become one of the most vocal advocates for police reform in the community, organizing neighborhood watch groups that focused on preventing racial profiling. The news story shifted to showing the changes implemented in the department: mandatory bias training, community oversight committees, and a new system for handling vacation rental verification. The female officer who had helped Aiden that day was now leading some of the training sessions. "Your dad's program is really making a difference," Kimberly said proudly, watching as the report showed police officers engaging in community outreach programs. The department had undergone a complete overhaul of its training procedures, with Daniel's Civil Rights Division providing guidance. Zara closed her laptop, where she'd been working on her own project. The incident had inspired her to start a student advocacy group at her high school. What began as a few concerned teenagers meeting during lunch had grown into a district-wide organization promoting understanding and equality. "My presentation for the school board is next week," she reminded them. They're finally considering adding bias awareness to the curriculum. Her voice carried the same quiet determination that her father's did when speaking about important cases. The doorbell rang. It was their neighbors from across the street, bringing over a newspaper article they'd spotted about similar reforms being adopted by other police departments in the state. The Anderson case, as it had become known, was sparking changes beyond their immediate community. "Remember how scared we were that day?" Aiden asked suddenly, looking up from his homework. "Now we're helping make sure other kids don't have to feel that way." Daniel closed his laptop and pulled his son close. "That's exactly right, buddy. Sometimes the scariest moments can lead to the most important changes." The past months hadn't been easy. There had been countless meetings, interviews, and difficult conversations. They'd had to relive that day many times through testimonies and reports. But they'd faced it together, turning their trauma into transformation. Kimberly's hospital had even started a program addressing racial bias in medical care, inspired by her experience as both a doctor and a mother who had watched her child struggle to access his inhaler during a crisis. "Oh, guess what?" Zara said, scrolling through her phone. "Remember that vacation rental? They've named their new anti-discrimination policy after us. All their staff has to take cultural sensitivity training now." The news segment ended with footage of the beach where they'd eventually enjoyed their vacation. After that first difficult day, they'd refused to let fear win. They'd built sandcastles, collected shells, and created new memories to overlay the bad ones. "We should go back," Aiden suggested, surprising everyone. "Not to that same place, but somewhere else in Florida. Show everyone that we're not afraid." Kimberly and Daniel exchanged glances. They'd been hesitant to suggest another beach trip, unsure how the kids would feel. But here was their 12-year-old showing more courage than they'd expected. "Actually," Daniel said, pulling out his phone, I got an invitation to speak at a police academy in Miami next month. They want me to present the new training program. Maybe we could combine it with a family trip. Zora's face lit up. I could present my school project to their community outreach team. Some of the officers who've gone through Dad's training said it would be really powerful to hear from a teenager's perspective. The family spent the rest of the evening planning their return to Florida. This time not just as tourists, but as agents of change. They would visit the police academy, meet with community groups, and yes, spend plenty of time on the beach. Later that night, as Daniel reviewed another department's request for training assistance, he found himself reading through the family's collected testimonies again. Their words, especially those of his children, had become powerful tools for teaching empathy and understanding. Dad. Aiden appeared in the doorway in his pajamas. Can I ask you something? Always, buddy. Do you think we really made things better? Like for everyone? Daniel thought about the reforms spreading across departments, the communities coming together, the officers learning to check their biases. He thought about Zora's advocacy work and Kimberly's medical program. He thought about the neighbors who had stood up for them and the changes they'd inspired. We made a start, he told his son honestly. And sometimes that's the most important part. Change happens one story, one person, one day at a time. Aiden nodded satisfied. Then I'm glad it was our story that helped.